The EBMT annual meeting brings together professionals working in all aspects in the field of clinical bone marrow transplantation and cellular therapy. Now, as we go virtual for the 46th annual meeting, EBMT presents an outstanding program to fit the digital format. And here to bring you the highlights, we're EBMT TV. Welcome to EBMT TV. Well, as clinicians, nurses, scientists, and many more transplantation professionals log on for this exciting virtual edition of the EBMT annual meeting, we're here to bring you all the highlights. On today's show, we catch up with keynote speaker María-Victoria Mateos. We visit the Siteman Cancer Center and discuss one of Cyday's top presentations. We'll be hearing about the work of Germany's first donor center, Stefan-Morsch-Stiftung, and taking a look at what's not to miss from this year's Nurses Education Programme. We'll also be discussing the impact of COVID-19 on transplantation around the world. First though, a very warm welcome to the meeting itself.
Dear friends and colleagues, welcome to EBMT. Welcome to our 46th annual meeting. Welcome to our first virtual EBMT meeting.
So the organization of this year's annual meeting was a major challenge for EBMT because it was the first time we go from an on-site meeting to a completely virtual event.
This year, as you know, in light of the COVID pandemic, we have faced unprecedented challenges. I want to nevertheless congratulate the team and everyone for bringing together this state-of-the-art virtual platform to hold the annual meeting.
The highlight of this year's meeting will be the recent development of the cellular therapy, especially the CAR T-cell therapy, but also the increasing importance of haploidentical stem cell transplantation, and last and not least, the impact of COVID-19 on the transplant procedures.
To me, some of the highlights of this year's virtual meeting are first, the high quality of the science. We have many randomized controlled trials that you'll see presented in the meeting. And second, our first multi-stakeholder forum on innovative therapies that is very timely in the current development of cellular therapies in our field. I'd like to invite you all to navigate our very intuitive, state-of-the-art virtual platform.
The most benefit of this virtual meeting for you as attending is you can look to the sessions also on demand later on until 1st of November. So please check the program carefully, select the session of interest for you, and if you don't have time to go for the session, you can look on demand later on.
Even though having a virtual meeting arises as a response to the challenges that we're facing in the COVID pandemic, I definitely believe that we're going to be able to learn from this experience and that we're going to be able to apply the new concepts of this virtual platform to future EBMT meetings.
EBMT TV is brought to you virtually from the 46th annual meeting of the EBMT. Find us in the EBMT TV studio on the virtual platform, on the EBMT website, and of course on the EBMT 2020 app. And make sure to hit the playlist button to check out extended versions of all our content. From award winners to hospital and donor centre site visits, it's all here on EBMT TV. Now for the first of our EBMT TV features, we go to the United States to visit the Siteman Cancer Center, where they're pioneering personalised medicine and novel therapies for a wide range of hematologic malignancies.
Personalized medicine is really diving into the genetics of a patient's tumor and disease and identifying where it's gone wrong in specific terms, and then identifying those genes or pathways and targeting them with specific therapies.
Natural killer cells, or NK cells, are one of the innate immune cell types that help protect us from infection and also mediate anti-tumor response. What they really do is work together with other immune cells as the first responder, and they can do a couple of things. They can kill cancer cells, and they can orchestrate other immune cells to come in and help mediate a bigger immune response to that cancer.
I think that we were really at the very forefront of personalized medicine, but I think where we're different is that we're moving into new frontiers that nobody else is there yet, and so things that we're doing now will become hopefully standard of care in the next decade or so.
This year's annual EBMT meeting will begin with a keynote lecture from Dr. María-Victoria Mateos. To begin with, perhaps you could start by telling us what got you interested in multiple myeloma.
Multiple myeloma is a rare disease for which melphalan and prednisone has been actually the conventional therapy for more than 40 years. When I started to be focused much more in multiple myeloma, the treatment landscape for myeloma patients rapidly evolved, and now it is possible to have in front of us patients with multiple myeloma living more than 10, 15, or even 20 years.
Your lecture looks at how treatment is evolving. What more do we need to learn?
In spite of the fact that new drugs have been incorporated as part of the induction, as well as even the monoclonal antibodies, autologous stem cell transplantation is a complementary strategy. Although we are incorporating new tools like minimal residual disease assessment, as well as risk assessment of the patients, and when we incorporate these two things, I think that in the future maybe we can individualize more and more the treatment of our newly diagnosed myeloma patients.
What's next for multiple myeloma then?
We will have the opportunity to see how cell therapy will be incorporated, and definitely in 5 or 10 years, I think that we will be able to offer a potential cure to some group of patients with newly diagnosed myeloma patients.
Dr. Mateos, many thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for the invitation to the keynote lecture.
Next, they're Germany's very first donor centre and now have over 500,000 registered donors. Let's take a look at the work of Stefan-Morsch-Stiftung.
They continued to support the development of unrelated transplantation and made public donor searches even after Stefan died.
Over the years, more than 500,000 donors have been registered in the Stefan-Morsch Foundation. The foundation also still supports financial research, and the goal is to improve the outcome after transplant. We will try to find donors for every recipient and to improve this already really successful network even more.
Cyday has been a big part of EBMT for several years, allowing clinicians to get a better understanding of the psychological demands on their patients. Well, Angela Sherworth got the chance to sit down with one of this year's top presenters.
Mary, can you give us a brief overview of your study?
So hemopoietic stem cell transplant is an established treatment for many primary immunodeficiencies presenting in childhood, but very little is known about the long-term outcome of these patients, particularly the kind of psychosocial outcomes. We conducted a study where 83 participants took part. They'd all had a transplant prior to the age of 16. Patients reported poorer physical health and a greater impact of their physical health on their everyday lives, such as work and school or social lives, than their matched controls. And also they reported generally higher levels of anxiety and depression than the general population.
What are your suggestions to improve patient care based on the specific areas of need identified by your study?
So I think the study established that there's definitely long-term need in this population, both in terms of the physical outcomes, but also the psychosocial, particularly around the kind of specific areas of need that we established, like anxiety and depression, that could be easily treated within the community. If psychology isn't available in-house, which is very rarely available in centres of immunodeficiency for adults, then I think it's important that we upskill clinicians to be able to feel comfortable asking these questions and knowing pathways to support patient care if needed.
I am so intrigued that you involved a patient advisor. Can you give us a take on that?
We had a patient advisor join our steering committee, and he's advised on every step of the research project, from the grant application to patient information sheets, and it's been brilliant. His perspective and his experience has really enhanced our project.
Thank you so much, Mari, for giving us such a wonderful insight into your work and for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you.
The Nurses Education Programme is an essential part of the annual meeting, allowing nurses to stay on top of trends in the field and to learn the very best practice in clinical care from their peers. Giving us an insight into this year's schedule, it's John Murray and Michelle Kenyon.
Hi Michelle, I'm really looking forward to this virtual meeting. We're all going to be online watching the presentations and hopefully interacting with each other with questions at the end of the sessions.
2020 is the WHO Year of the Nurse, and nurses have been so critical to the global COVID response. I think one of the sessions I'm completely looking forward to is the opening session, looking at lectures on nursing and lockdown. Both Isabel and Julia have certainly been at the forefront of COVID in their own institutions. I'm also really looking forward to our education day, focus being on steroids this year. Often many staff look at steroids and think they're just another drug, and they're handed out quite easily, and people don't really see the devastating effects that they have. And graft versus host disease is a devastating problem. Eyes, mouth and genital graft versus host disease are certainly big problem areas for patients. I'm looking forward to the highlights, the best of the best and the best of the rest. And then the networking event, John, should be interesting this year. Yeah. We're fortunate that we've got half a dozen nurses that have agreed to log in, so you can ask them questions about their presentations. I shall be getting my questions ready for the experts and my glass of wine in my hand, so I hope to see you there. I'll bring my orange squash. Well, it's been great talking to you this afternoon, Michelle. Thanks very much, John. Good to talk to you again. So I'm delighted to welcome Angie Leather, who's a transplant coordinator, clinical nurse specialist working at the Christie Hospital in Manchester. And Angie's going to be presenting on the topic of genital GvHD. Your work in women's health sounds really exciting. How did that interest come about?
It came about by accident, really. We saw a lady in clinic and we sent her through for just a routine smear, and she came back to clinic and said, oh, it's too painful, it was just absolutely impossible, couldn't do anything. And then I started to do a bit of sort of like digging around and speaking to people, and found that there was a massive unmet need, and it's just escalated into something bigger than I ever anticipated it would be. You know, initially it was just sort of talking to the ladies and seeing, you know, what their concerns were, to actually setting up a women's health clinic, really. And can you offer key messages to nurses who don't have the same experience as you do in talking about sexual health? The basics is all that the patients are wanting. They don't want scientific information. Just keep it simple. Make it fun if possible, you know, and that's really weird. It's, you know, it's not about sort of like a bit of a joke, but it's about making it so that the patient feels comfortable talking to you, like you're talking to your mates, really. That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Angie. Thank you, Michelle. Thanks.
Marika, you're giving a talk on the implementation of a tool to support parents of patients. And can you tell me a little bit about this tool, where it was developed and who developed it?
We started with doing 35 qualitative interviews with the parents for making a tool to improve communication with the parents. So who is it exactly that uses this tool, Marika? Everybody can use this tool. So most of the time, the caregivers, like a nurse, a psychologist, a doctor, but even a friend of a parent can use this tool and can say, look here, there's a tool how you can cope with all your experience, how to cope with the illness of your sick child.
And what impact do you think that using this tool has had for your parents and the patient?
It's a very big impact because you recognize the experiences of the parents. We gather data now and we ask in a questionnaire what if they have suggestion to improve that tool, because that's important if we want to go further.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Marika.
Thank you for having me.
I'm delighted to be speaking to Nicola Chabannon, who's a teenage and young adult physiotherapist. You're going to be talking to us at EBMT about your work on osteonecrosis. Are you able to briefly summarise the research?
I completed a qualitative piece of research with 8 young people with osteonecrosis, which is a degenerative bony condition really that people can get after a range of different cancers, but predominantly leukemia, and just talk to them about what their life was like and the impact of the condition on them. And the findings were quite sobering really, and often people had kind of rehabilitated, if you like, quite well following their cancer, but then had been diagnosed with osteonecrosis, which was then this long-term condition that actually impacted them even though their cancer might have been cured.
What was the most surprising thing that you found from the research?
I think at one point someone said they weren't able to move more than 10 steps without stopping at a time. And there was someone else who was crawling up the stairs. And yeah, I think just that really significant impact on young people who would otherwise, have been going to college, socializing with their friends, and how much people put up with, to be honest, because they weren't sure what else to do and they didn't know who to turn to for support.
Now for a special discussion between a group of EBMT experts looking at the impact of COVID-19, led by Dr. Per Ljungman, EBMT's Registry Committee Chair. Over to you, Dr. Ljungman.
COVID-19 has had a major impact on all our lives and on healthcare across Europe and the rest of the world. And to discuss the impact of COVID-19 on transplant units and patients, we have prepared a few questions, and I go directly to the first one. How did COVID-19 impact your center? And we'll start with Anna Sureda, please.
We organize our daily life to try to minimize the visits of the patients into the hospital. And of course, we adapted the type of treatment that we were giving to our patients, taking into consideration the pandemics.
Everything was changed in order to minimize the contact between patients and health personnel. And the mentality of the health personnel also changed very much.
We stringently reorganized our activities. The first one was to protect our patients, since there were from the very start reports that COVID-19 could be more severe in patients with neoplastic diseases. The second one was to protect our personnel, so we established some rotation. And finally, managing some of the scarce resource, especially at the start of the pandemics, protective equipment, individual protective equipment.
Did you change which patients underwent stem cell transplant at your center? And we'll start with Anna.
We changed following the EBMT board indications and other international bodies. So we significantly decreased the number of stem cell transplantations, and this decrease was basically seen in those patients potentially candidates for allogeneic stem cell transplant.
We delayed, indeed, the non-urgent transplant, and we considered non-urgent transplant those with that have a low risk of relapse, particularly the multiple myeloma patients, and followed strictly the BMT guidelines about the
autologous transplant field was the one where we had to rearrange the healthcare path for a significant fraction of the patients. And the consequences on allo transplant and CAR T cells were more limited, and we are returning to normal now.
The next question is, what are the most important lessons learned? And I can say from the Stockholm Swedish perspective is that I would have never envisaged that we could change our healthcare, particularly the access to ICU, the way we were able to.
Our surprising capacity to be able to quickly adapt to this completely new situation for us. And I think that we have also learned how to better use telemedicine.
We need to take care of our healthcare system. The healthcare system is been doing very well, but we need more investment. And also, I would say that we need more research in viral diseases.
Not only do we need to take care of the healthcare system, we need to take care of healthcare professionals for them and also for the system to keep running.
In all our 3 countries, in France, in Spain, and in Sweden, there are numbers that seems to be increasing. What are you doing now to prevent COVID-19?
I think that we have to basically streamline what we have learned from the first wave and trying to minimize as much as possible the number of infected patients in this potential second wave.
We are doing PCR testing massively. We have changed the way we look after our patients with telemedicine mainly. And we, of course, need urgently a vaccine.
The virus is there to stay for a while, at least for a significant period of time, and we have to adapt and learn how to live with it. And as always, education is key to protect people, protect our patients.
I can only echo what Christian just said. This is not a sprint race, this is a marathon. Hopefully we will have a vaccine that is able to moderate the disease and decrease the spread, but we will still have to deal with the virus for a long time to come. And with that, I close this session. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, that's it for our first show here on EBMT TV. Today represents a great start to the meeting, but of course there's lots more to come. Tomorrow we'll be hearing from this year's Young Ambassadors and finding out about the Patient Family Donor Day, as well as much more. So make sure that you find us here at the EBMT TV virtual studio. We'll see you then.